So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. So I say this every week, but I mean it from my heart. Thank you for tuning in. It means a lot to me. And I hope that you find these conversations edifying. I do. I'm learning so much by just being behind this microphone on a weekly basis. But also, the people I present to my audience on a weekly basis are pretty remarkable people. And I want them to be heard more than me, to be honest with you. That's why I invite them to come on. And I've had amazing people, as you all know. If you, those who listen know. If you like what you hear, and I hope you do, I would ask that you pass this to your friends and family. We're trying to build a big audience why? Because I think that the people I bring on need to be heard, and the messages and the topics we talk about are relevant to many of you in terms of what you're going through with your children. So that means a lot to me. And today is such a pleasure to introduce Dr. Diana Wildermuth. She is a PhD with a degree in educational psychology. She's actually, in her day-by-day, she's a licensed professional counselor, a former school counselor, and she specializes in sports recruiting and sports activities for kids. Diana Wildermuth, thank you for coming on the Hamilton Review today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure.
I do need to just add, I'm also I'm a lecturer in educational practice at the University of Penn. So that is actually my full-time job. All of the rest is just the fun part of what I get to do with my life.
So, Dr. Wildermuth, I like to have my guest sit back and just kind of opine and talk about their life and how you found yourself doing what you're doing, because I think this is an interesting conversation. So I will yield the microphone and you can take it from here.
Great, thanks. I always share this story, especially at the beginning of the semester when I talk about my journey, and how did I get to this place of being an instructor and being a counselor? How did I get there? So I always start with my path. I love athletics. I've loved sports. I've played sports when I was in high school. I've been around them my whole life. I am a huge Philadelphia sports fan. I know that maybe people won't be listening anymore when I say that, but huge Philadelphia sports fan, love my sports teams. And it just was very natural. So I started school as actually a sports medicine major. And then when I got there, I had to take kinesiology and memorize bones. And I was like, that is not my thing. I'm going to have to, I can't do all of that. So, but I knew I really liked working with people. Like I knew that was something that I was natural at, something that I wanted to do. So I went on, got a degree in sociology, and then went on and got a master's degree from Villanova in counseling, became a high school counselor, did that for 15 years, where I had the opportunity to work with families, work with teenagers that were, thinking about their future plans, going on to college, whether they were going to play athletics, whether they were not going to play athletics, what their paths kind of looked like. And I decided that just wasn't enough, because I'm also a lifelong learner. So I went on and got a PhD in education with a specialty in educational psychology from Temple University, where I actually ended up working for the last 7 years before I transferred over to the University of Penn. And there I was an instructor teaching in the counseling program. With that, I was lucky enough to have students that were in my program that were kinesiology students. So we're back to those bones that I didn't want to remember, right? So I had some students that were going for different credentials in working with high performance athletes. So from there's a lot of counseling aspects that goes with the mental health and how do athletes perform. So I was like, oh my gosh, my world has come back to working with athletes at the same time as being a mom of two, I should say, two high school athletes now. Two kids that played a lot of sports throughout their entire life and are currently also competing at a pretty high level. So with all of that, it just seemed very natural for me to kind of focus on how do I continue to help families through the recruiting process because of my high school counselor background and experiencing it myself with children, my own children going through the process. And at the same time, I've had the opportunity to work with different athletes, professional athletes, hearing their experiences, talking about mental health, what that looks like. And that's kind of how I've landed here. And now I get to continue doing that. And I supervise I supervise pre-licensed counselors here in Pennsylvania who are working towards working with student athletes at the university level and in high school. So it's kind of cool. It's a lot of fun. It's really where my passion is.
You've had a great journey. So let me wind back the clock a little bit.
Yeah.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up here in Pennsylvania, so it's a kind of a joke that not a joke, but all of my schools have been in Pennsylvania. So I went to East Stroudsburg University, Villanova, and then Temple. So I grew up right outside of Philadelphia.
And which sports did you play when you were a kid?
So I played softball, but I was a football manager in high school. And a lot of that was, being responsible. I learned how to tape shoulders, or wrap shoulders, tape ankles, getting ice. And that's really kind of what got me interested in sports medicine. Obviously, I wasn't going to play football. And, when I'm not going to talk about how old I am, but back then there wasn't as many women in sports. Opportunities weren't the same. But I tried everything: volleyball, field hockey, and I'm also 5'10", so I played basketball. It's one of those things. I've tried every sport and kind of found the ones that I liked. I'm also left-handed, which is kind of cool for some sports.
No kidding. I mean, good lefties are dangerous people. And when you're talking about the left hooks and things like that on on the basketball court, and also, are you a pitcher? A baseball?
I was actually a catcher and first baseman.
Okay. Okay. I get, yeah, first base, of course. Left-handed, you have no choice. They put you at first base.
Yep.
Which is great. Well, listen, one thing you just said here is you tried everything as a kid. Some of the people listening have kids who are beginning to focus on one sport. I'm talking about junior high, high school kids. Those listening, that's who I'm talking about. So my feeling is this. I don't mind people emphasizing one sport, but I like to see a diversity. What are your thoughts about that?
Wholeheartedly agree with you. Colleges and even high schools, they say they want a multi-sport athlete, right? They want somebody that can play multiple sports. And also, the thing about being a multi-sport athlete is that you're using different parts of your body at different times, and you're also using different parts of your brain. Take for example the kid that plays soccer in the fall, right? Like it's so much more of their feet, and I mean they're still using all of their body, but it's just different parts of their body and how they focus. And then to the spring, if they play a sport like lacrosse, they're using a lot more of their upper body strength in a different way, going up and down the field. So there's that overuse, and you also don't want to burn kids out, which I see a lot of. That is kids burning out because they've specialized so early. And I think that that's a concern for injury. And I think at the same time, you want to love the sport. You want them to
Yeah.
love the sport.
Yeah. I think that diversity is kind of the spice of life. You're kind of something new. I think that I've seen that myself in my practice where kids kind of get pigeonholed too early, and there's such a focus. They have tutors, they have special coaches that teach them how to, ground, hit the ball, ground the ball,
Yep.
pitching, and all this stuff. Different tutors, or each coaches for each of these is like, whoa. And then they get into high school and they kind of go, I'm done. Even in high school and definitely in college, they say, no way, I've done that all my life, and they miss camps and they miss other things. So I do think that diversity and kind of changing it up does make for more, makes it more fun for kids.
It's my kids both play lacrosse. They played a ton of sports through the years: soccer, wrestling, football, basketball. One of my most favorite memories that I would say is the lacrosse coach, the travel lacrosse coach of the one team, had the team. They might have been like sixth or seventh grade. I don't remember what it was, but he had the boys sign up to play basketball. If you ever watch lacrosse players play basketball, there's a lot of fouls, because lacrosse is such a physical sport and basketball is not the same. So, but in terms of the way they have to position themselves and play is very transferable.
Yeah.
So, and you're also talking about team bonding. I mean, I think that's a huge part of it for kids. Like, is who are the people on the team that the kids get to play with? Are they their friends? Do they become their friends? And I think that also really has a lot with when we're talking about how kids develop into future humans and part and just who they are, is who do they become friends with and how do they work with others. But that was one of my most favorite memories, is just watching them play basketball. And They were
So,
okay.
yeah, well, they kept on bringing their sticks on the court. No wonder they had so many fouls.
Yeah.
The coach told them, don't do that.
Yeah. So it was pretty funny. It's cute, like looking back and just thinking about it. And they still have memories and they talk about it because they were not good basketball shooters. But I don't know. Maybe if we put those basketball players on the lacrosse field, we'll see how they would do.
Yeah, no kidding. That's cute. So you alluded to a question that I love to ask people, and that is the value of sports in general. I think about this in a big way a lot. I mean, I think about the value of kids being on teams, learning how to be part of a team, the discipline. Your thoughts about this in kids just being athletically involved?
There's so much that can be learned from athletics. And and I don't want to, I mean, I know this talk is all about athletics, but I think that it's the same whether you become involved in band or the play or whatever your kid gets involved in school. There's a sense of belonging. A lot of this stuff, and when I talk about the research that I do, I look at identity development across the lifespan of an athlete. So where did they start and how did they continue that athlete? Like when I started this, I said sports have been a whole part of my life. I mean, I wouldn't know a world without sports. And I will say, like through the pandemic, it was challenging. There were no sports to watch. And we watched a lot of reruns of sports, championship games and things like that. And it's always been a part of my conversation. It's just athletics in general, how things are doing. And so I think one part of it for kids is that they build relationships. One, I mean, that's the part of it, is that I think they can build lifelong friendships. It's a part of belonging, which is something that's important. They learn team skills. Even if you're doing wrestling, there's still a total score that comes at the end. You may be performing as an individual in your weight class, but you still are part of a team, and you're still something contributing to the end. So I think that's important. And finally, I think it teaches discipline. I mean, there's a structure that you're responsible for in terms of how do you follow, a discipline and a regimen, which could be how do you eat? Are you putting the right things in your body? And what does that look like? Are you getting enough sleep? So it does, force you in some ways to learn how to take care of yourself.
No doubt. And also keeps you out from in front of a screen. It also keeps you from some bad influences. There's a lot of bad influences in junior high and high school. I'm talking about kids who are getting into drugs and other things.
Right.
And so it kind of keeps you busy. When at the end of the day, I would bet, Dr. Wildermuth, that your kids are pretty tired. They probably flop into bed and they're sleeping within a half a second.
Yeah, I would say that. And the days are long. The days are long for some of our student athletes, and it is a balancing act. I'm not going to say that it's easy. I have the utmost respect for student athletes, whether it's at high school or it's at the collegiate level, because they can learn to manage a lot. I've talked to employers. I teach graduate level counseling, and many of them are looking at jobs, and they actually look at student athletes often a little bit differently because they know that they are structured, that they have a routine, that they can be part of a team. Those skills are very valuable for a lot of different careers. And I think that that's something that is really, really important. But yes, I would absolutely say my boys are tired. As a mom with driving to different sporting events, I'm often tired, but I am just a mom, so I'm just going to get to be tired.
So true. Mommies and daddies too spend a lot of their time, definitely in Los Angeles, on freeways going from one place to another place. It's unbelievable sometimes. But we do it for our kids because we love our kids, right? And that's why we do it. I'm curious. You're dealing with emotional issues. I'm going to talk about in a minute. But one thing, that I see, I guess, on the field when I go to baseball games and different things, watching my grandchildren now and my children when they were younger, is that there are people out there, there are parents out there who get this idea that their child is going to be the golden boy or the golden girl. They're going to be the next LeBron James or Mickey Mantle. You know Mickey Mantle? You don't know Mickey Mantle?
I do, but I like to follow Bryce Harper. It's just a Philadelphia Phillies kind of thing. But
Okay,
sure.
okay. I figured you'd bring it back to Philadelphia somehow.
Of course, of course.
But anyway, these guys, they kind of go, or Willie Mays. How about that one? Anyway, so the point is that what do you say to these people? I mean, I know that when they're younger, I mean, we all have big dreams, and nothing wrong with having big dreams and hopes for your children. but there's also a point where you have to get a grip.
Yeah, I never want to be a dream crusher, right? Like, I mean, who wants to be a dream crusher? But there is something like a reality, that reality check of what team your child makes, or do they not make the team? Are they a starter? Are they not a starter? And the way that I have always, and I will say this, I've always raised my children, and I will say this forever. And this is I'm going to go back to, again, a Philadelphia sports reference. Like, you can be the next Nick Foles. When Carson Wentz, who's phenomenal quarterback, got injured, Nick Foles had to step in and take him to a Super Bowl. And that is one of these things that we need to be. Resilience is where my research has started. When I started this 15 years ago, it was all about resilience. And so it's one of these things of like teaching kids. I'm going to get back to the original question, but teaching kids that you never know when you're going to get your chance to shine and show what you have. So you always need to be prepared to be the next person, to be the next one that might need to go in. Or if you are that starter or that highlighted person, that is the next LeBron James or whoever it might be, how do you manage that? Some kids get a lot of attention very early on because maybe they grew, kids grow at different developmental levels. Maybe they were taller than everybody else, or maybe they were bigger, or their shot was faster, whatever it might be. They might get a lot more attention early on, but other kids do catch up. I have a 6'3" kid. He was not 6'3" a year and a half ago. He probably grew 6 inches in the last year or something like that. So, that's the thing that I think is really hard. But as parents, we always want what's best for our kids, but we have to listen to them and we have to support them.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's hard, but it's funny because I also will say I'm around a lot of kids that are going to be playing Division 1 sports and Division 3 sports and going on to that. But what I can say is, just supporting your kid and watching their development, giving them opportunities, but at the same time, not forcing them to overdo it. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read the book with Andre Agassi and everything that he had to do in terms of, you know, how much tennis and how many reps he took and what happened. Like it's one of those things that we need to support them and it be a balance.
Yeah. I had a conversation one time with a gold medal swimmer. He swam some years ago and won actually several gold medals. And he said that his father, who was a very good swimmer, never coached him, number one, never actually got in there. And every time he would go have a competition, his father would look at him and say, have fun. That's all he said. That was the only thing he said. Hey, son, have fun today. And that was it. And so I think that, sports are basically about having fun. They really should be fun. That's why they're so attractive to people. I even at my aged self, I love to go out in the backyard and play wiffle ball with my grandchildren. I mean, I get a charge every so often. I get to get up a bat too and hit the ball. But I really, it's fun to actually go out there and play games. I mean, and it should be fun. And in times past, we used to organize our own games. How about that one, Dr. Wildermuth? I would knock, go around the neighborhood and knock on doors and say, hey, let's go play football in the street, whatever. So we would recruit kids in the neighborhood to play, pick up baseball or football or whatever it was. And that's kind of how we did it.
Yeah.
We can't, what do you think about having fun and playing sports?
Absolutely. I'm going to say this something, and if my kids were here, they would agree with this. I learned this when my kids were probably 6 or 7 years old. This is the best advice anybody ever gave me. And they said, don't tell your kid what they've done wrong. They already know. So when it comes to when your child's coming off the field or they're coming off the court or out of the pool, whatever it is, whatever sport is their thing, they already have a good idea of what they want to do better. We don't need to tell them. And that is something that I have lived by. When my kids will get in the car, whether we've just had a really long tournament and it's hot and it's summer, and I'm like, what do you want to do for dinner? Like, it's having those normal conversations that it shouldn't be focused completely around an athlete. And that is something that my kids, I'll always tell them, like, yo, you did a great job out there, loved this. Highlighting, and I'm a very strengths-based person. That's always been where my mindset has been, especially as working with athletes, is strengths-based. What do you do well and how do you keep doing it well, right? How do you sustain that? So even as a parent, it's focusing on what did you do well, and just asking them if they had fun. The most exciting thing is when I see my kids smile, but I think that any parent would say that is when they see their kid come out and they're smiling because they had fun.
Yeah.
You got to keep the fun in sports.
You got to keep the fun. I mean, there is emotion, there is passion.
For
I
sure.
remember ABC used to have a thing called ABC Sports, and it was on in the afternoon, I think on Saturdays, and it would say the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Remember that phrase?
Yep.
And it's so true. You know, it is thrilling. Just a kind of a personal note. One of my granddaughters plays lacrosse, and the other day they were in the championship game. Okay, hope anybody on the other team is not listening right now. Anyway, the other team was up by about 3 points, and it was like the last quarter, and they were beginning to kind of get up, catch up, and literally the last 3 seconds of the game, a shot was made in this lacrosse game that put my granddaughter's team. It won the game. Okay, it won the match, and so they were just. I mean, there was this. It was the roar from the crowd for the victors was unbelievable, and a couple of my daughters sent me a couple of pictures of my granddaughter, and she was just elated. I mean, that the thrill of victory, and she was like jumping up and down with her girlfriends. That is a memory that she'll never forget.
Yep, for sure.
And it's fun. I mean, and that is fun. That is definitely something that, it is like, whoa, and obviously the other side of the coin, I mean, the agony of defeat, those girls are going to kind of go, oh my gosh, we lost that one. But you know what? They're going to get over their remorse. They're going to get over their sadness. We kind of do, thank God. But we eventually get through it. Okay. So when you're a counselor and you're dealing with kids who are dealing with, they're having anxiety, how do you guide these young people?
It depends. I'm going to say there's a little bit of it's sports specific, but that's not always the case. A lot of it is seeing where's that anxiety coming from. Is that a performance piece? Is that just an anxiety because they are naturally just an anxious person? Or is it that there's so many things going on in their life that they're thinking about, I have to perform in this way because that's my ticket to college? Or do I have to I need to do well on this test that I'm having because it's got APs coming up, which I think they're finishing up APs now, advanced placement exams. And I also have this huge game. So I think it's just trying to see where that anxiety might be coming from. So it can often depend on the sport and how they feel it. But things that I like to do, and many mental health professionals or even mental performance coaches do, is I do a lot of imagery. I do a lot of imagery and how do you see yourself winning? I can go through and work with a client and go play by play to maybe what is the play that causes anxiety for them. So, maybe they just haven't been able to make that shot that they used to make so many times over. So going through mentally practicing, what does it look like to go through that vision of seeing it from how do you get in your stance? It's 3 seconds. The timer's going down. You hear somebody using all of the senses that they have in focusing in that moment. That's one thing that I do. I love mindfulness. It's something that I always try to teach is, take 5 deep breaths before you do anything. Take a deep breath, breathe in, focus, block everything else out, and really center yourself. Because I think that mindfulness piece, sometimes the biggest enemy, or I should say the biggest opponent, is the one between the 2 ears. We can be our own biggest opponents. That self-talk can be dangerous. So it's really trying to teach athletes how to change that self-talk into a way where they become the performers that they are or were or can be.
One of the things we talked about in our pre-call was the idea of recruiters. More and more people, the college recruiters are looking for kids who are the outstanding kids. And you mentioned something that I guess I should have thought about, never thought about, but they're looking at data. They're looking at size of the kids, how tall they are, how much they weigh, how fast they are, their performances. How much does this, these numbers that kids are, these, you call them measurables. I like that term. Do you think that adds to that anxiety that kids feel?
So I'm going to give you my true counselor answer. It depends. It depends on so many factors, because it depends on what sport. It could depend on what sport, and they maybe have all the measurables, but maybe they don't have the athletic ability, but they might have several measurables. I think it's I think it can also be challenging in that recruiting process, because not only is it just all of those other factors, like how fast do they run, or how many goals have they had in the season, or what do they weigh, or how tall are they. I do think that that's there, but I don't know that all kids think about it entirely. I think we as adults probably focus on it more than the kids do, but you can see it. If you look at, there was a picture that I saw that was floating out there, and I don't remember the sport, but you could see the size difference in 13-year-olds. And one 13-year-old was like a foot and a half bigger than another 13-year-old. So I think something that's really hard, and recruiters can't always see that far out because they see what they're thinking about in that recruiting moment. And some actually, I'm going to say this, let me back this up. Some coaches are great about projecting, and some coaches are very present oriented. So that depends upon, when your child's going through the recruiting process, what kind of coach are they talking to? The present oriented coach or the projection coach? So the projection coach can see that that kid has the frame, has everything there, has those measurables. They just didn't grow into it yet.
Yeah.
That's just something that happens. Kids grow. My husband didn't grow. I think he said he grew 4 inches in college. Like that's sometimes what happens, is people grow a little bit later.
Yeah, I had a kid who did that, and I think that it's important that I remember one time we had when I was a kid, we had a particularly incredibly precocious athletic guy in junior high and early high school, and this guy, he could run faster, he could do everything, he was like number one in everything, and the reason he was is because he had matured earlier than everybody else, so he was like he went through puberty a little bit ahead of everybody else in the class. But everyone eventually got there, and then all of a sudden he began to recede, and he kept on receding. So that to me was kind of a sad situation, because with this guy who was absolutely phenomenal in 8th and 9th grade suddenly became less phenomenal, and he kind of dwindled in 11th and 12th grade. So I think that emotionally was probably really intense for this guy.
Sure.
But that happens, and you definitely obviously see that all the time.
So I think the kid, some kids peak, right? Like they peak at different points, and I think that's that recruiting part of the process. Is like, is the coach projecting what they're going to be, and what have they looked like? I mean, coaches watch a lot of film. They watch a lot of film to see how kids perform and how they evolve, and what can happen from there. Something else that I want to also, when I go back to talking about measurables, that is really hard to kind of quantify, is sports IQ. When you're talking about different sports, like how a child, and I say this regularly with lacrosse IQ, what is your off ball movement? Do you know where to be, when to be? Can you project, or have you figured out that the other teams play already, because you just know the sport so well that you've already kind of figured out where that guy is going to be, or that girl, whoever the athlete is naming the sport. So it's like, one of those things is, how well have you seen the game, know the game, and what is your IQ for knowing the sport as a competitor?
It's a great thought, and that you can't teach that.
You can't.
Yeah,
Some kids just have it.
yeah. Another question I have for you is, kids get injured. They pull a a tendon, which is not a big deal, but maybe they have a meniscal injury or a anterior cruciate, an AC tear in the knee, which happened to one of my children. And so you have a phenomenal athlete, and suddenly they're injured. How do you deal with the emotions of that?
So, it's a lot like, depending upon their age, and there's a lot of different factors. So we can maybe take an example of somebody that has been recruited, or hasn't been recruited, high school athlete. We'll talk about an 11th grader, right? That's maybe been recruited and they get hurt. There's an emotional side, because we have to think about, how are they developmentally?
Yeah,
They're 16, 17 years old. They're
yeah,
not, they're not adults thinking the way that we think about their future. They may think that their future has ended. That opportunity, that recruitment, that coach isn't going to want them anymore because they just became injured. And that does happen. So, they're thinking about that. They're in pain, right? I mean, they're dealing with an injury. They're in pain. their identity. Maybe they've played this sport forever and they've just been told they can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really hard. So I often treat it very similar to how we look at grief. There's a lot of emotions that come along with grief, and that's like, why did this happen to me? You know, how do I get through this? And what is it going to look like? And what can I do to maybe get back out there? So I think there's a lot that goes along with it. So from a parent perspective, I think parents experience that grief and that loss too, of maybe not being able to get to see their child compete, and maybe they'll get back out there, right? So I also believe in hope, and that kids can work towards getting better or recovering or doing something different. So it's a tough one. It's really a tough one, but I would say, I think that's when a lot of mental health support is actually needed, is
Yeah.
if a high performance athlete does get injured, because they are losing something. And there's a lot of fear that comes along with that.
Sometimes in the middle of the night, your worst fears come out, right? And sometimes after an injury, obviously there's a loss. That sense of loss and grief is probably a better word, but I can definitely see that, and I've seen it in my own practice. You mentioned, Dr. Wildermuth, this idea of the roller coaster ride of emotions. Can you clarify that a little bit?
So it's a roller coaster ride. So I will anything, any sport when you're competing, and you just mentioned your granddaughter's game. I mean, they're down, they're up, they're down, they're up, right? Like there's the excitement, and there's like the whole process of going through the excitement of, this is going to happen, here's the date, they've been doing all these things. So when I say that it's a roller coaster ride, it could be the tournament of the weekend that's the roller coaster ride, that you've won all of these games, you've gotten to this championship, and you want to stay there. That's a lot of emotion, because people have put things behind you with this expectation that you are a champion, you're going to continue to be a champion, and you can't lose. So there's a lot of emotion that goes with that. But through the recruiting part, I'm going to focus on that for a minute. I think the recruiting part is challenging because kids compare themselves to other kids. That's just what normal teenagers do. What's everybody else doing? So, if they hear that their four friends in the same sport have been recruited, they start to go, why am I not being recruited? If they want to be recruited. Or how did they get to that school? I know that I'm a better athlete than they are. They start to think about those things. Or the coach that reaches out and then they don't hear from the coach for a little bit, and they're like, does the coach not like me? So I sometimes call it's like a really bad dating experience for teenagers. The coach is texting them, they're in constant communication, and then they don't hear anything. And in a kid's head, it's like, oh, they don't like me anymore, they're not interested in me. In the coach's head, they're focusing on their season, and they've got 4 games coming up, and they don't think about, like, that the 17-year-old is thinking, oh, why didn't the coach get in touch with me? So I think there's a lot of emotions in that respect, because it's, again, they're thinking about their future. Is that school going to be the right school for them? How far away are they going to be from their family, and do they want to continue playing in sports? It's a lot of emotions. And there can be times, and I know an athlete that experienced no contact from any college coaches, and then this one weekend they had this amazing tournament. They had 38 coaches reach out to them in the next week. That's overwhelming, right? Or like, it's 12:01 on September 1st, and you have 3 Division I college coaches in your driveway getting ready to offer you a spot on their team with a full scholarship. That's not my experience, but I'm just saying that I can imagine there's so much excitement that goes along with that, but a lot of pressure too, that you put
Sure.
on a 17-year-old in their junior year, asking them to make a decision for what it's going to look like 2 years later.
So much. I mean, that's if I threw 3 Division I coaches in your driveway, man alive. I maybe what I'd probably do is say, okay, you guys duke it out. The one who wins, I'll sign with you. That's kind of
Right.
probably how I'd settle that one. But another question. Okay, talking about coaches, there is a reciprocity here. There is part of it, they're choosing you, but you're also choosing them.
Correct.
And so what does the ideal coach look like in your mind?
I guess that's probably a little bit hard for me to say, because I think each kid needs a different kind of coach. There's different kinds of coaches out there. There's the coach that is going to be the coach that you can go
You're
to.
talking exactly like a psychologist. You're
Aren't I?
not giving me straight answers.
I know, this is what we do. Well, See, that's it. Because it depends on the kid. Like I will give an example of having, my two boys, they go to two different high schools. They have two very different coaches, and they have very different high school experiences. And people often ask me, like, why do you send your kids to two different high schools? And by the way, they're also in two different states. So not only, that part of it, they're in two different states, two different high schools. And I'm going to tell you, each school is the right school for each kid. And each team is the right team for each kid. And so I just got lucky in that way. But what I'm going to say is that I think that for me, the coaches that I appreciate are the coaches that care, the coaches that want to connect. They're not just about the end game and getting to the win. They're the coaches that are going to be there for you if you're experiencing something in your life. My one son got in a car accident, and within, I don't even know, 3 hours, his coach was sending him messages. You okay? Just wanted to check in. I'm here if you need anything. Like, the kid's going to want to perform for a coach like that because
Sure.
that coach cares. So for me, maybe it's that because I am a counselor that I really lean towards that emotional, like, if you show you care, I think that child or kid, that athlete is going to perform better for you because you believed in them.
I think that it does come down to that relationship. I was just taking a couple students around UCLA last weekend, and we walked by the Poly Pavilion, of course, which is famous, where John Wooden coached so many years ago, and he was such an amazing coach. I think he had multiple NAAC championships, like in a row. I think he had like 10 in a row or some insane number. And you kind of go, how did that guy do that? I mean, yes, he was recruiting, but there was also something he did to make those young men the kind of players that they were. It wasn't all that he got all the right players. He had something going on, which was truly amazing. Okay, well, listen, I'm watching our time, and we're winding down here. Couple thoughts. First of all, how do people find you, Dr. Wildermuth?
I would say the best way is to find me through the University of Penn website. So I'm very easy to Google. Diana Wildermuth. Do you need me to spell that out?
Yes.
Okay, because it's a fun last name. So my first name is Diana, Diana, and then my last name is Wildermuth, Wildermuth, and I work at the University of Penn. My email address is actually kind of cool because it's wildiana@upenn.edu, but it's WILDIANA@upenn.edu.
Probably not too many wild Dianas out there, so you got that one. That's a great name.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah, I say to change my email to like Wild Dr. Bob.
Yeah, I thought that was
would probably
pretty cool.
attract a lot of people. So, anything that I forgot to ask you, Dr. Wildermuth? Any parting comments to these parents who are in this situation where they're going to be they're dealing with these kind of sports issues?
So two things. The first one I'll say is, as you mentioned, how to get in touch with me. The article that I had that was in the educators playbook, which is through the University of Penn, which covers a real short blurb on how to go through the recruiting process. But that part of it is that the end part, as I always say, is enjoy the ride. Like, this is your child, and enjoy the time that you get to spend with them, that you get to spend watching them, supporting them. And then the other part I'm going to say is that find your group of parents that you can bond with and relate with. I have a group of moms and from both of the high schools that my kids and they're my group, they're my people. I know I can talk to them about anything, I can go to them with anything, and they're also enduring the same roller coaster. And so you need to, as a parent, have your own support system while you're going through this journey, but at the same time, enjoying the experience of just watching your child grow and learn all these skills to be the best human that they're going to be when they get out there.
Good advice. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Wildermuth, for taking your precious time to be on the Hamilton Review today. You were a great guest, so thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And friends who are listening, thank you for tuning in. I hope you gained something, learned something today. Until next time, be well. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.